Shravanam Mananam Nidhidhyasanam. Listen, reflect and absorb. Dear listeners, Sai Ram and welcome to our radio series in which a divine discourse by Bhagawan is played in small parts, and following each part a short discussion is undertaken to reflect on the message. The discourses undertaken for study in this program are from the series of discourses delivered as part of the summer course in Indian Culture and Spirituality, 1991. Have a listen, please.
Offering our humble pranams at Bhagawan's lotus feet. Dear listeners, we welcome you to this week's episode of Shravanam Mananam Nidhidhyasanam. Those of you who've been following us will know that we are going through the 1991 summer course series. The last time around we went through the 1990 summer course series. We completed one entire discourse, and last week we began with the second discourse. We heard two clips in that discourse. About 15 minutes into that discourse, that's when we concluded last week's episode. A very, very interesting episode. Those of you who were with us last week would agree, and I'm just waiting to get into the discourse because it's only going to get even more interesting. But before we begin, as always, Sai Prakash is with me, and as we have some time, we also have a guest. But today's guest is no guest to the listeners of Radio Sai. We have our own Karuna Munshi, who's going to join us today. So definitely this is going to be a very interesting session. Sai Ram Didi, and welcome to Shravanam Mananam Nidhidhyasanam.
Sai Ram, and thank you for having me.
And I'm not going to quiz you to name the program.
Thank you. I feel much relieved.
One of the persons who often came and told us, why did you choose such a long name, and how do you pronounce it? And the last time around when the name we thought we chose revealed itself, how it got named, I think it was so beautiful for all of us. I think it was the last discourse, right?
It was the last line of the last discourse. And it was so dramatic because I think about a year and a half had passed from the time we had started the Shravanam Mananam series, the first series. And we had no idea because the printout that we have that doesn't often reflect all the words that Swami says. But the last line of the last discourse, Swami says, Ide Shravanam Mananam Nidhidhyasanam.
Oh, what a perfect seal of approval.
I mean, if he had decided the name maybe 30 years ago when he gave the discourses, and 37 years ago when I was born possibly.
It makes you feel so wonderful. This morning when we were going through the Ramayana, we were going through that episode where the Govardhana hill is uprooted and it starts crying, and Rama says, don't worry, in the next birth when I come. When you go through the story in Dwapara Yuga, Krishna's story, it's so dramatic. The villagers refuse to offer prayers, and Indra gets angry and his ego needs to be corrected. So much for Indra's ego that it was all pre-planned one full yuga before.
Yes.
Even his ego was pre-planned.
Right. Even
obviously.
his ego and his arrogance and how he had to be corrected and everything. And if that is the amount of detailed planning God does, one program which spanned about 2 years, I think
it's nothing.
Is nothing in front of that.
And it tells you that, in the drama, everybody's role is so well scripted, we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Right. And in fact, even as we're going through this discourse, one of the things which Swami mentioned last week was about when you go through life, especially looking out for moments and trying to connect and trying to understand. One of the obvious things which should come out of that is humility. It's when it strikes you that it's so much of it is so much larger than me.
Yes.
I am such a small person in this entire scheme of things. And in fact, that's one of the things as we summarize, we'll come to that. As we said last week, this discourse did appear a little different because the way Swami approached it, there was so much of, what do we say? There was a certain amount of depth in the time which Swami took to convey whatever he had to convey in those first 15 minutes.
Looking at it more scientifically, there was more gravity in each word, I would say.
Yeah,
each word. There was a lot of, deliberate pause, and there was a sense of brevity which we really didn't see in others.
And I only started reading this discourse since yesterday, since you invited me to join you. And I found that it is a very well-planned lesson plan. A
That's
perfect
right.
teacher could have done this, because Swami has given an abstract of an entire thesis, and in his infinite wisdom, I found it intersects the story of human evolution from various perspectives such as anthropology, philosophy, and human geography.
Right.
Because he maps the progression and evolution of human thought very carefully, and it's a very profound topic, but Swami made it so simple in bite-sized portions that he served to his students so that we could understand it. And he clearly recognized that man in his early stages, he was in awe of the mysteries of nature and elements, and that's why he realized how small he was, as you mentioned, in the greater scheme of things. This huge dose of wonderment and awe forced us to recognize, I believe, the unrecognizable. And while trying to study the enormity of the cosmos or the mysteries that lie hidden within it, it forced humanity to acknowledge the incognito presence of a mysterious force or a principle. And Swami made it so clear that this is the principle of singularity, that one that became many, the one that looks like many. And I guess human beings, we just struggle to define everything, whether it is our relationship with anything or the phenomena around it. So Swami taught us how we evolved by trying to understand it in terms of nature, through numbers or through names. So this compulsion, we have to define every relationship in our life. This higher principle, is it bigger than me? Is it the sun? Is it the number? Is it the Gayatri mantra? So I would say the whole perspective, I found it to be strikingly spiritual, because as they say, spirituality is about defining your relationship with God. Religion is more about crowd control. This is definitely very spiritual. I was wowed by this discourse that you shared with me.
One of the striking things which occurred to this is just like how the primitive man would have gone around. The first thing which Swami says in that opening remarks is he says that the world is the basis of everything.
Yes.
Right? Because the first thing when you look around, you try to understand everything from the world around. You don't look beyond it. You say that everything happens within it. So everything which I want to know is within this. And one thing which Swami would often say is that comparison between animal and man. What is different? If you want to define the life of an animal, I think it's all about answering the question how. How do I get food?
Okay.
How do I get the partner? How do I protect myself? And many times when you see man also does the same thing, but man has this extra intelligence which he has used to redefine that question of how. And that's what Swami says in the later part, where he says first man looks around nature and he says, okay, I need the sun. There are some activities I can do in the day, some activities that have to be done only in the night. That understanding sets in. And then this idea of fire and wind and all of that comes. After that, the stage comes where he can manipulate the elements to a limited amount.
Yes.
Okay, there is fire, I can create fire, I can control fire.
Yes.
But at the same time, there are some aspects of fire which I cannot understand. Like what Swami said, the beautiful point of, all the while the fire is within the dry twigs, but the dry twigs don't get burnt up.
Correct.
So Swami is saying that, here is an element. First I didn't understand it. Now I understand it, I can manipulate it, but still I don't understand it completely because it's, there is no way I can understand it completely.
And it's so mind-boggling that it leaves a big question mark about what's going on around me and who's responsible.
Right. I think that was a very beautiful point that Swami said about childbirth. When as an elder you look at the child, you see the first thing the child needs or craves for is something to satiate the hunger.
Food, yes.
So it's almost, Swami says, that's the first problem you encounter. The way Swami put it. He said the first problem a human life encounters is hunger. So Swami says that is the lowest, that is the most basic. But if we're going to live our entire life only to sort out that problem, then there's something, so much more is left out.
That's right. After that, he very beautifully took it to how man started observing nature. And once his basic necessities are met with, I suppose, you start looking at nature, you start trying to understand what nature means and trying to see how nature sustains you. And this beautiful topic of how the sun was looked at as a form of divinity itself. Even now, I think there are so many traditions where we worship the sun. There are festivals associated with worship of the sun. Looking at it from a scientist's point of view, possibly they would say this is just one sun amongst millions of other suns in the cosmos and in creation. But what matters really is it is this sun that is sustaining us. Mm-hmm. So what's wrong with looking at a God in this sun? After all, this is the conflict that possibly scientists have with our ancient thought. They always look at it as a law of nature. These are forces of nature and this is natural. But who gave them those qualities? I mean, why should there be a Big Bang? Why should the universe expand? Why should there be condensation? Why should these things happen?
And why should there be photosynthesis so that we can make food? And I think the early man was quite intelligent to recognize it, because not only in the Indian culture, but also in other ancient civilizations such as the Greek and the Mayan, sun worshipping was very common.
Right.
For example, in India, we chant the Aditya Hridayam. It's a special prayer only dedicated to sun god, because sun is seen as the provider of sustenance and life force. And that's how the concept of the Gayatri Mantra came into being, because we realized that when we worship sun, we are worshipping a life-giving principle. Mm-hmm. And in this connection, just a slight digression, I recall that in the 1980s, I think 1981, when the Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning was founded, Swami spoke to us as students and said that you have a greater responsibility now, because this university bears my name and you must strive to do well so that the university is well recognized. We were the first batch of students to graduate from the Sai University. And Swami made a mention of the power of the Gayatri Mantra. He says, as students, when you study, you're so anxious, you're so stressed out at exam time. But when you go to write your exam, the ability to recall what you have studied at the right moment, the exact material that you need to reproduce, and to express it well, that happens when you are plugged into the cosmic intelligence. Oh. And Gayatri provides the ramp to connect to the cosmic consciousness so that you can recall, recollect. And I have found, since I was not always very careful with my studies, I would, in my desperation, chant so much Gayatri that I would actually learn my lesson or the topic while I was answering. In the moment, somehow something would click, and all the days of lessons by my professors, during which time sometimes I would be daydreaming or distracted, which was not the right thing to do, it would all click, and as I wrote, I understood what I was writing. I think such is the power of the Gayatri. Mm-hmm. And ancient Indians recognized it very early when they were in awe of the power of the sun.
Right.
I used to wonder, especially when now if you say that every human mind is capable of all the knowledge in the world. Mm-hmm. That's something which Swami would often say. I think that was something which was mocked at by scientists for so long. Unless you learn it, you don't know it. Yeah. There's nothing like you can contact something and it comes from within. But something which Swami always said, I think that's one of the things which Swami had told Professor Gokak when he asked, Swami, how is it that you know of all these philosophers you're naming and all this? And Swami said, no, it's not like that. Every human mind has the ability to connect. But today you look at the cell phone, know it. There is something called a SIM card which actually has a memory capacity of 128 KB or something like that, 200 KB or something. But the amount of data that it can access is actually unlimited. It runs into thousands and thousands of TB. Exactly. And that's precisely what the human brain is like. It has the capacity to access any amount of knowledge. Only it has to be tuned to the right, signal or the tower premi.
In fact, after Swami spoke about the sun, then he went on to the numbers.
Yes.
And, I couldn't help just going back and reading a little bit about Ramanujan, the mathematician, the star mathematician from India. Much of his mathematics was inspired. Not much. I mean, all of it. He had no formal training as a mathematician, and all of it was just inspiration. And he says, there's a beautiful quote. He says, an equation for me has no meaning unless it expresses as a thought of God. Wow. And his greatest discoveries in math, or call it invention or discovery of mathematics, happened via visions. So he was so devoted to Namagiri Devi. So he would worship her, and his visions, she would reveal aspects of herself which translated into his mathematical formulae. He would kind of relate most of his equations and most of it to her aspects, to her manifestations, and how different it is from the so-called objective scientific thinking. I mean, they come to the same end. At the end, they come to the same, but how much more beautiful this is.
Intuitive mathematics.
Exactly.
I think that mantra Purnamada Purnamidam kind of sums it up, because it speaks of infinity and the parts of infinity and the infinity of each part and the perfection of each part. That's like cosmic math. Wasn't Ramanuja the person who gave us the zero?
That's right. He is the one who gave the zero, and many more things. His, I believe, his theories and his concepts of mathematics are finding new relevance in string theory and other theories that are being discovered today. And they go back to his theorems and say that yes, they are being verified today.
Exactly. And just going back to that sun example which Swami was giving, actually Swami makes a very important point. I think it's going to be followed up in probably in the same discourse or the other discourse. Swami talks about that first tool to know, what is called as Pratyaksha Pramanam in Vedantic philosophy, where direct perception.
Yes.
So Swami makes a point. He says, first of all, man established the connection between food and sun.
Right.
So sun became a direct representation of divinity for him, starts worshipping it. And then when he started this exploration towards gaining knowledge, he realized that first step, which is called Pratyaksha Pramanam, is completely based on light, and that light is being given by sun. And that is where the connection between sun and intelligence and sun and knowledge was established. And Swami goes on to say, just like how you need light to see, which is the foremost in that Pratyaksha Pramanam tool, similarly for knowing, it is that intelligence which comes, as an illumination. As you're saying, it's an inspiration. Sometimes it's so serendipitous that you have to believe that there is somebody else who's orchestrating the discovery or the invention.
Right.
I'm just reminded of, sometime back I was reading of how infrared radiations were discovered. It's very interesting. There's this German scientist, I think I've got his name here, Friedrich Wilhelm Herschel. He was the person who actually discovered the Uranus. He and his wife are scientists themselves. What they would do is they look up into the sky, and they had this technique. They would have different filters of different colors, and they would look at the planets and because some of them will not be visible when you just look through the telescope. And when they were doing that, they realized that some colors were cooling to the eye, some colors were actually warm. Okay, so then they realized that when you split white light into this spectrum, each color might have a different temperature. So he devised an experiment by which this light is put through the prism, and each of those colors he measured the temperature. Okay, and then he starts measuring the temperature of each one, and finally comes to red. He realizes that's the hottest, and accidentally he realizes that just beside red the thermometer becomes more hotter. Where there is nothing visible. So that's when he realizes that there is something which is beyond what can be seen also.
Beyond the visible.
Right.
range.
And he calls it thermal rays initially because it's hot rays. The beauty of this is, the science talks of it as, here is something which can be seen. Okay. And there is something which can be known by a different way, but the intelligence to connect both and say that there is something which is beyond what can be seen.
No, if you read the life histories of many of the scientists, there is tremendous hard work. There is a lot of reasoning. There is a lot of hard work and logical flow of ideas and trying to derive. But that moment when they get, it's always a click. It's always given. It's almost as if the Lord above or the force above is waiting. Okay, now you're ready. Take this knowledge. It's almost like that. It's always given. That form of knowledge is given at the right moment. That's how it seems. And I'm not sure who it is, probably Paramahamsa Yogananda, who said, it's not an accident that the entire consciousness of the world,
writes about it, right?
He writes about it, that this is the 20th century is when we have such startling scientific discoveries and inventions. He says it's not an accident. It's a deliberate raising of consciousness.
So it's part of a big evolutionary process of the human intelligence.
And Swami is mapping it, and he says how it all started with observation and how it came to, and then now I think the next section is where we go into the significance of God's names.
Yeah, because the human beings wanted to define it and define this relationship and give it a name.
No, more than that, I look at it if there are the crest of society like the sages, the Brahmins of those days, they had the understanding and the knowledge to know that, okay, this is the sun, this is the moon, and these are different, but they gave them an identity in the form of a god, so that regular person, a normal person, a farmer, a householder, they could worship and get the benefit of gratitude. You show gratitude to nature, you worship nature. The moment there is a form attributed to sun, then anybody can easily relate to it. I think that's how it went on. And the sages were the scientists of those days.
Spiritual scientists.
Yeah. So they gave names, they gave a form, they gave attributes. I
think the names were based on the attributes that they fathomed.
Exactly.
And going back to what I said about the answering of the question how, I think at some point these rishis stopped and asked why.
Okay.
Why am I allowed to know? Because you can endlessly try to find out how does this happen, how does that happen. How does the sun produce heat? How does the soil produce the crops? But at some point he said, why is this happening? Why am I allowed to explore nature? Why am I allowed to know things? I think that's when he realized that there is something which is something like a super conscious being, which is probably, eager to be known.
Right.
And I think that's where the whole thing starts. And he, this idea of there is this substratum which is holding all this thing together. And can we get to know that? It takes me back to that legendary conversation between, I think, Shvetaketu and Uddalaka. Have you learned that learning which you have learned all?
Yes.
So at that time, the father gives this example. If you know the nature of pot, every shape and every utility of what is made with that clay, you know it because you know the clay.
Correct.
So it's almost like the eagerness and the quest to know that. And when Swami spoke about that arithmetic, I think that's where he said that 1 + 1 + 1, nowhere in the pursuit of this knowledge, it was forgotten that 1 was the basis.
Right.
And Swami starts with that by saying that, that is the basis, and Ishavasam idam jagat. That's what the Vedas declared. And I think from there, Swami takes off. Swami speaks about the different names of that entity, which is, you can call it divinity, you can call it God, or whatever it is. So shall we go into the clip?
I think it's a good time to do that.
దీనిని ఆనాటి ప్రజలు
those people of those ancient days,
ఆదిత్యః అని పిలుస్తూ వచ్చారు.
they call that power as Adityah.
ఆదిత్యః అనగా ద్వాదశాదిత్యులలో ఒక ఆదిత్యుడు, అతనే విష్ణువు అని.
Adityah means among the 12 Adityas, the 12th one, that is Vishnu.
విష్ణువు అనగా కేవలం శంఖ చక్ర గదా పద్మముతో కూడినటువంటిది కాదు. విష్ణువు సర్వవ్యాపకమైనటువంటి తత్వము.
Vishnu does not refer to the form which way holds mace, conch and disc, etc. It is omnipresent and it is found everywhere.
ఇలాంటి విష్ణుత్వానికి మనం ఒక రూపాన్ని కల్పించుకుంటూ వచ్చాం.
For Vishnutva, which is all pervasive, is given a form by us.
నిజముగా విష్ణుత్వం అనగా సర్వవ్యాపకత్వమే అర్థం.
Actually, the Vishnutva means it is all pervasiveness.
ఏ విధంగా ఒక్కడనే మనం విశ్వసిస్తూ వచ్చాం ఆదిత్యుణ్ణి.
How did we begin believing in Aditya?
రజిత పాత్రలు ఉంటాయి.
There are silver vessels.
దీనికి సువర్ణ పాత్రలు ఉంటాయి.
There are golden vessels.
బ్రాస్ పాత్రలు ఉంటాయి.
There are brass vessels.
కాపర్ వెసల్స్ అంతా ఉంటాయి.
There are copper vessels.
మట్టి వెసల్స్ అంతా ఉంటాయి.
There are mud pots.
ఇవన్నీ కూడా నువ్వు నీటితో నింపినప్పుడు
when you fill them with,
అన్నింటి యందు కూడా నువ్వు సూర్యుడు ప్రతిబింబిస్తుంటూ ఉంటాడు.
sun gets reflected in the water of all these vessels.
పాత్రలు వేరే కానీ
vessels are different.
పాత్రల యొక్క విలువలు వేరే కానీ
their values are different.
కానీ అన్నింటి యందు సమానంగా ప్రతిబింబిస్తున్నాడు సూర్యుడు.
But sun reflects uniformly in all these
కొన్ని
vessels.
వేల పాత్రలు పెట్టినప్పటికీ వేల సూర్యునిగా కనిపిస్తుంటాడు.
If you keep thousands of vessels, you can see thousands of suns reflected in them.
కానీ పాత్రలు వేలకు ఉంటున్నాయి కానీ సూర్యుడు వేలకు లేరు, ఒక్కడే అనేటువంటి సత్యాన్ని అర్థం చేసుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
Man began realizing that the vessels are thousands, but there is only one sun reflected in them.
ఈ పాత్రల యొక్క విలువలు, రూపములు, నామములు వేరువేరుగా ఉండవచ్చు.
The names, forms and values of these vessels may be different.
దీనిని ఆధారం చేసుకొని దేహములనే పాత్రలుగా విశ్వసించుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
On this basis, man began believing his body is a vessel.
ఈ దేహము మృణ్మయమైనటువంటి దేహము.
This vessel is made up of mud.
ఈ మృణ్మయమైనటువంటి పాత్ర యందు చిన్మయమైనటువంటి యొక్క దివ్యత్వం ఉన్నది అని సత్యాన్ని గుర్తించు వచ్చారు.
He also realized that in this mud pot there is that resplendent gold consciousness in it.
ఇతనిని హిరణ్యగర్భుడు అని పేరు పెడుతూ వచ్చారు.
He has been described as Hiranyagarbha.
కనుక ఈ విధంగా ప్రప్రథమం నుంచి మానవుడు కొద్ది కొద్దిగా అభివృద్ధి గాంచుకుంటూ కట్టకనప్పటికీ ఏకత్వాన్ని గుర్తించుకునేటువంటి యొక్క దివ్యత్వాన్ని సాధించుకుంటూ వచ్చాడు మానవుడు.
From the ancient days, gradually man began realizing these truths and he came to a stage wherein he realized that there is only one entity.
ఇతనికి మరొక పేరు కూడాను సృష్టించుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
He also gave one more name.
ఈశ్వరః అన్నారు.
Ishvaraha is the name given.
అనగా నిరుపమాధమైనటువంటి యొక్క ఐశ్వర్యం కలవాడు. నిరుపాధితమైనటువంటి ఐశ్వర్యం.
Ishvaraha means the one who has inexhaustible wealth.
ఏమిటి ఈ వెల్త్?
What is this wealth?
హెల్త్ ఒక వెల్తే, ధనం ఒక ధనమే, ఆరోగ్యము ఒక విధమైనటువంటి ధనమే, విద్య ఒక ధనమే, గుణం ఒక ధనమే, తెలివి ఒక ధనమే, సర్వము ధనముల కిందనే పోల్చుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
Health is wealth, money is wealth, wisdom also is wealth, knowledge is wealth, money is also wealth, success itself is also wealth.
ఇవన్నీ కూడాను ఒక విధమైనటువంటి ధనములే.
All these are different forms of wealth.
కనుకనే సకలైశ్వర్య స్వరూపుడు ఈశ్వరుడు అనేటువంటి సత్యానికి దిగారు.
He also believed that God is one who commands all these types of wealth.
సకలైశ్వర్య స్వరూపుడు ఈశ్వరుడు.
Ishvara is one who is having wealth of all types.
తరువాత ఇందులో ఉన్నటువంటి రహస్యాన్ని గుర్తించి శివః అని పిలుస్తూ వచ్చారు.
After realizing the inner meaning of this, he began calling God as Sivaha.
శివః అనగా త్రైగుణ్య రహితుడు అని అర్థం.
Sivaha means he transcends all the three qualities.
సత్వ రజో తమో గుణములకు అతీతమైనటువంటి వాడు.
He transcends the qualities of sattva, rajas and tama.
గుణములు లేనటువంటి వాడు కనుక ఇతను శుద్ధ సత్వుడు అని కూడా పిలుచుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
As he does not have any one of these qualities, he has been described to have
ఆ
pure
శుద్ధ
sattva
సత్వుడే
quality.
శివుడు.
That pure sattva quality is
అదే
Shiva.
మంగళకరమైనటువంటి తత్వము.
That is also the principle of
గుణములు
auspiciousness.
లేనప్పుడే మంగళత్వం ఏర్పడుతుంది.
Where there are no qualities, there is
గుణములు
auspiciousness.
ఉండినప్పుడే అమంగళం ఏర్పడుతుంది.
Where there are qualities, there is inauspiciousness.
కనుక శివః అనగా మంగళ స్వరూపుడు.
Sivaha therefore means the most auspicious one.
క్రమక్రమేణా ఇంకా ఉన్నత స్థాయికి వెళుతూ వచ్చారు మానవుడు.
Man began making further progress in his evolution.
శంభః నాలుగో పేరు పెట్టుకుంటూ వచ్చారు.
The fourth name, Sambhaha, was given.
సంభః
Sambhaha is given.
అనగా సంభవం అంటే ఏమిటి?
What do you mean by Sambhavam?
తన ఇష్ట ప్రకారము
According to his own,
ఏ నియమములు లేకుండా
without any rules, regulations,
ఎప్పుడు అవసరమో,
whenever there is need,
ఎక్కడ అవసరమో,
wherever there is need,
అక్కడంతా ఏ కాలములో అవసరమో
at whatever time there is need,
అప్పుడంతా కూడాను తాను ఉద్భవించేటువంటి యొక్క భావము కలవాణ్ణి సంభవ అన్నారు.
the one who descends and manifests himself like this is described as Sambhavaha.
అందువల్లే భగవద్గీతలో కూడాను యదా యదా హి ధర్మస్య గ్లానిర్భవతు భారత అభ్యుత్థానం అధర్మస్య తదాత్మానం సృజామ్యహం పరిత్రాణాయ సాధూనాం వినాశాయ దుష్కృతాం ధర్మ సంస్థాపనార్థాయ సంభవామి యుగే యుగే సంభవామి. ఎక్కడెక్కడ అవసరమో అక్కడంతా తాను ఉద్భవిస్తూ ఉంటాడు. అలాంటి స్వాతంత్రము కలవాడు కనుకనే అతనికి సంభవ అని పేరు పెట్టారు.
God has been given the name Sambhavaha because he has the freedom to descend and manifest wherever and whenever in whatever form he chooses.
కనుక ఈ విధంగా కూడాను భగవంతునికి అన్ని పేర్లు ఈ విధంగా ఒక్కొక్క అంతరార్థాన్ని పురస్కరించుకొని పేర్లు పెడుతూ వచ్చారు.
Thus God has been given different names depending upon the man's understanding.
ఈశా,
And that Isha will have to wait till the next clip. And how many names did Swami give there? 4, I think, right?
Aditya, Ishvara, Siva. And he did mention Hiranyagarbha,
Vishnu, of
referring
course.
to,
Yeah,
Aditya is same as Vishnu. So I guess as the thought process evolved and there was progression, humanity or the collective consciousness started giving names according to their understanding. And one thing that is very clear is that God was perceived as being omnipresent, as being all-powerful, and the bestower and provider of many blessings.
Right. If you look at it, there's one thing which Swami would often say. I'm sorry, I don't know if Swami has said it, but it's definitely mentioned in Swami's presence that a buffalo will pray to God as a cosmic buffalo. I think this is probably a trend where man looks at his limitations and believes that this divinity must be beyond this limitation. And all the names, if you look at it, it's actually an expression of that thought. Like for instance, when Swami says Vishnu is omnipresence.
Right.
When this realization comes that I can be only at one place at a given point in time, that's a limitation. So when you think of God as something bigger than me, he must be omnipresent. At all times, he should be able to be everywhere. That description of God is defined in this name which is given Vishnu. Right? And then when you look at this thing of Swami saying Ishvara, who is actually inexhaustible. And again, it is like, when you go through life, it's always like how much resources I have. How much can I provide? So you're looking at God as somebody who is having inexhaustible resources.
Who transcends your own limitations.
Right. So each of those limitations and expression of God as somebody who transcends that limitation, you describe God and you give him a name. So Vishnu for that omnipresence, for the indestructible, Swami says the name of Chinmayam. Swami says that which is limited is Mrinmayam, that which is limitless is Chinmayam. So the indestructible nature of God is given a name, and all prosperity, that is given the name Ishvara. And then you look at it as when Swami says Shuddha Sattva, I think that's another limitation which man would have recognized in himself. That is, something which we saw in that 1990 discourse, freedom. Who is free?
Right.
When Swami says, even when you're doing an act of charity, you're doing it under the influence of this attribute of goodness.
Yes.
You're not doing it out of your own free will. So probably man would have realized that, whatever I'm doing, whether I'm angry, I'm bound by these, invisible gunas. So describes God as somebody who's beyond the gunas. And gives him a name for that, Shuddha Sattvam, or Shiva, as Swami said, who's beyond. And again comes to this, the last name, Sambhava. I think that's again a limitation which we can see in all of us. I have not chosen the family I was born in.
That's right.
I have not chosen, probably given a choice, I would have born probably in the 1950s and come to Swami earlier.
That's right.
That choice was not with us.
Yes.
So again, expressing that ability of God to be beyond that limitation and choice, he says Sambhava. He is somebody who can appear anywhere, anytime, whenever he chooses.
Right.
So it's almost like, describing God as somebody who is, if I'm X, he is infinity X.
Right.
He's so much limitless beyond me.
Looking at this segment of the discourse, another thought comes to me that Swami has spent time in describing the names of the Lord. He has not yet come to the forms.
Right.
See, possibly when the sages and when our ancients thought of the Lord, they gave them names. They gave them names pertaining to certain attributes of which they are beyond. So the names have that potency. And I think in some of Swami's discourses, he asks, which kind of sari was Mrs. Brahma wearing? Was she wearing a 6-yard sari or a 9-yard sari? And which sari was Mrs. Vishnu wearing? Which sari was Mrs. Shiva wearing? He says, this is all imagination. This is all your Raja Ravi Varma's imagination. That is so powerful here, because one of the main criticisms of religious thought possibly is that we get diverted into the rituals and the form aspect and worship of the form
and the imagery. Yeah.
We go behind the imagery, forgetting the source of that imagery, what it stands for. And here when Swami is trying to bring about, he's trying to connect us to the purpose why such a name was given to that aspect of God. Here you still see that these are all aspects of one God.
Right.
You don't see them as Vishnu separately, you don't see it as Shiva separately, you don't see them as different forms of God. We see them as attributes of that one God.
Right.
And I find that Swami's delivery of this lesson plan is so organic, because he's trying to teach us as novices, but he begins from this perspective of Nirguna Brahman. We haven't gone to Sagun really, in the sense that form hasn't come in and many other attributes. He's just keeping it very pure, very clean and clear, that these are the attributes of God, whether it's omniscience, or bestower of abundance of health, wealth, prosperity, intelligence, talent, or one who is all that and beyond. So he's really building a case step by step, because as we will progress, we will realize he is all this, but he's not bound by even these. He's beyond all this and none of all these. So it's a very confusing logic, but Swami is building it in such a careful manner so that we can relate to it and we can relate to how people thought at that time. And it's like plugging into their stream of consciousness to see how they tried to grapple with this issue of a force which was so much larger than themselves. And it represented humanity's collective wishful thinking of what should be, not realizing what later Swami told us, we are all also the same. Right. At that time, we were bound by our limitations. So this represents our wishful thinking of being somebody beyond these attributes of time and space. And how I wish I could be right now transported to a beautiful island in the Caribbean on a holiday. Now, if I was Sambhavami...
Sorry, you are not Vishnu. You cannot be omnipresent.
Thank you for that sad reminder, CG. But if I was the Sambhavami God, right away.
No, but if you realize who you actually are, possibly you could do it.
Yes, beam me Scotty there.
That's the beauty. In fact, in one of the discourses, Swami says that's why Vishnu represents the mind.
Yes.
Because the moment you think of probably a Hawaiian, destination, your body might not be there, but your mind is there.
Mind is there, very much so.
So the mind actually is a representation of Vishnu, because it has the ability to be at all places at all times, whichever places it chooses to be at least. And I think probably another reason why it was easy for them to see God, attribute names but not attribute forms is, the moment you start going out and say that, sun is like a god, water is like a god, you're already starting with beyond the human form.
Right.
You're not starting with somebody who should be like me with 2 limbs, or, let's give him the credit by giving him 4 limbs instead of 2 hands, and that sort of a thing. The ability to see beyond a form, fixed form, comes when you already have started looking at the sun and saying that, probably sun is the god, or probably the earth itself is the god, probably this air which I'm breathing is the god. And another thing which Swami says, that simile which Swami uses of the different pots which are made of different material reflect the same sun. This again is a peek into the thought process, where this is how the early man would have started exploring, and looked at a phenomenon such as this reflection, and probably would have wondered, is this the same with the life form inside me? Just like how the same sun is being reflected in so many, could it be possible that one is being reflected in the many?
Yeah.
And I think you can't take away the importance of similes in understanding and learning.
That's true. In fact, when we talk of how the different names of gods have evolved from what they perceive in nature and what they study in nature, many of the scientists, even modern scientists who are atheists, I was reading about a quote from many centuries back by the Byzantine Church, I believe, from Greek area. they said the study of nature was the surest symptom of an unbelieving mind. So the atheists are quoting it as a closed approach, that the spiritualists and the religious people did not allow people to explore freely. So they say that the study of nature was the surest symptom of an unbelieving mind. But how contrary it is to what Swami is saying,
Right.
and how open Swami's point of view is, and how the Indian school of thought possibly is, where we looked at nature and connected to God. And this is so much in sync with that hierarchy which Swami often says, individual, society, nature and God. So it is through your perception of nature and understanding of nature that you eventually go towards God.
And Vedanta represents the culmination of all thought when it comes to looking for the ultimate reality. But pantheism, which is looking for God in nature, was very much recognized in the Indian culture. That's why, because we were in awe of the hidden fire between the twigs, so we worshipped fire.
Exactly.
We were in awe of the wind, which we could not see but feel, and in awe of water, which man could not create. So we knew there were these elements which were larger than us, bigger than us, and they were life-sustaining. And the sun, of course. That's why we worship the elements.
That's right. In fact, on a lighter note, we got a recent WhatsApp forward in which there is this son, and the mother is saying, come for food. And the son says, wait, I've got to study up this Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And the mother says, see, I have not studied Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, but this is a sequence of the 10 avatars. Then she says, Matsya avatar is a fish. Kurma avatar is a amphibian. And then you get mammals, and then you get half man, half animal, Narasimha avatar. Then you get a Vamana, who was a short,
dwarf, right.
Maybe it's another species of Homo erectus or Homo sapiens. I mean, there is a beautiful correlation, and it was a WhatsApp message.
Swami had mentioned this, I think, when the boys were putting up a Ramzan program. Swami was having a session with him in the Bhajan hall.
Yes.
At the time, Swami explained this entire thing, how evolution is nothing but the Dasha avatars.
The Dasha avatars. So the entire process that science is discovering today was well known to our ancients, and they gave them names and attributes which is so much more lovable and so much more, I mean...
And without discounting the need for reverence, if you look at it, I mean, I go into a class, there's a teacher. The teacher is not giving me anything new. She's picking up from a textbook or, from what is already there, and she's giving.
That's right.
But still, we see a need to have reverence towards the teacher.
Correct.
I think it's the same thing, when with this analogy which Swami is giving, the sun is being the first teacher.
Right.
By this simple act of reflecting on so many water bodies, the sun is actually driving such an important lesson. So immediately the sun becomes, takes the role of a teacher and demands that reverence from man. I think that's why even after probably understanding, Swami says in the beginning part of the discourse, that eventually they understand that helium and hydrogen is causing the sun to give heat. But still, I think that reverence towards the sun never faded out. Knowing the science behind that object did not take away the reverence for that object. I think that is where probably, you all the time grow, but don't grow so much that you go beyond respect and reverence.
At the cost of a very big digression here, there is this beautiful story where Krishna is actually leaving the village and he is going back to Mathura. And all the gopikas are not able to accept it. And they are pleading, and then Krishna is just decided to leave. And then they finally go to Radha and they say, you are our leader. And if you tell Krishna, he will definitely not leave. Okay. So then she just smiles and she says, how can I tell Krishna? She says, we are like the 1,000 pots of clay and he is like the sun.
Oh, beautiful analogy.
She actually says that. She says, we are 1,000 pots. We are Prakriti. We are nowhere. How can you say? His reflection is seen in your pot. He is seen in my pot. That does not mean he belongs only to us. He is like the sun. And his reflection is in all the pots. It's exactly what Swami is saying here. And so she was in sync with that truth. So possibly that's why she is Radha.
Absolutely. I think that's probably the hint that all of this knowledge is accessible through devotion. In fact, that's what Krishna says in the Gita. He says, after giving all Sankhya Yoga and Jnana Yoga, he finally says, man comes to know me through devotion.
Yeah. And even in this discourse, as we will go along, Swami mentioned the need for humility and devotion to access and to create that personal relationship with the God and to realize. And speaking of nature, Swami also said that nature is the best teacher. So when he said when nature is the best teacher, he meant there were so many lessons we could learn from nature. That also evokes us, because that evokes a sense of reverence for nature, because it's so methodical, it's so systematic, it's so disciplined, it's so selfless and giving. So it was only natural for early man to have that reverence for something. Another reason for them to have reverence for nature.
Very true.
There's another clip, but I don't think we'll have time for another clip to be played. But then, just going back to this clip where Swami is talking about yada yada hi dharmasya. I don't know, the question which might rise is, so if you want God to manifest, let's mess with dharma. But that's the beauty in I think the Bhagavad Vaini, in the introduction to the Bhagavad Vaini, Swami says.
Okay.
He says, there are many reasons God comes, but the first and foremost reason is to satisfy the yearning of devotees. The adharma part actually comes later. And very interestingly, in another discourse which I came across, where Swami says, it's a beautifully logically Swami puts it. He says, see, first of all, God does not see the difference between good and bad. Then how can he say that you're bad, let me come and transform you? He says God can only see the good. So whenever he comes, it's only in response to goodness, but never in response to the evil. Probably, it's almost like an afterthought. Having come, let me...
Might as well.
Correct the wrong too.
And this progression of thought that Swami spoke of and we discussed so far about describing God as Vishnu or Hiranyagarbha or Ishvara and Siva, I think the progression also was reflected in Swami's own life, because he often told us that when I am amongst men, I am a man. When I am with ladies, I am a lady. When I am with children, I am like a child. And we have so many instances how Swami related to the children of the primary school. So each one, according to their own level of understanding and evolution, God becomes what you think God is. Right. He's a customized order at any point in time. And he's just a sum total of our aspirations and our imaginations about this phenomena, which is impossible to capture cohesively, completely at an individual level.
Right. And going back to that quote, really, what we speak of in, I think, physics as the observer effect. As long as there is an observer, the observed is not absolute. Because when Swami says, when I'm with men, I'm a man. When I'm with children, I'm a child. He says, when I'm alone, I'm God.
Yes.
And many times it would, occur to me, especially when you're sitting in for bhajans, Swami would go inside for an interview. After the interview, Swami will send out those people who are there, and Swami will remain in the interview room for a few minutes all alone.
Yes.
There'll be, so that time the temptation of, if we now probably go and peep into the room, you can see Swami as God. But the moment you peep in, the observer comes in and, the observed is not absolute
anymore.
A reminder, I think it was Sonam sir who shared that very beautiful incident. I think when Swami had taken them to Delhi, he was in his 12th standard. He was a very young boy, and they had this opportunity of sleeping on the corridor which was just outside Swami's door.
Okay.
So as a young boy, he was so excited about it to be, that thought that there's just the door and on the other side there's Swami sleeping.
Correct.
So he was sitting there and he was not getting sleep in that excitement. So after everybody had gone to sleep, he said, let me go and peep in and see what Swami is doing. Okay.
Through the keyhole.
Through the keyhole, yeah. And this boy gets up and slowly crawls and peeps into the keyhole. And imagine it's dark even in Swami's room. Because Swami would do that, Swami would just leave the light of the bathroom on. Though he's awake, he would not switch on the light. So this boy, imagine, it's so dark outside, it's dark inside. And he peeps in through the keyhole. The moment he peeps in, he hears a voice, hey. Right? He says, how do you catch Swami when he's alone? It's impossible, isn't it?
Really amazing. And this aspect of Shiva, which Swami is saying, how he transcends the three gunas. Going back to that scientific discourse that we had, in the 1990 series, how the combinations of the five Panchabhutas and in their manifestations of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, that's how the whole creation came about. It is almost impossible for us to disassociate and go beyond the three gunas. So unless you are in that state of awareness where
absolutism,
where you live that experience, it's not only that you believe, but you actually live the experience of being beyond the three gunas. And that is what Swami says is Shiva.
In fact, going back to that discourse, Swami says that initially all the five elements, I think it gives it a name, right?
Yeah.
Before the gross elements come, the subtle elements. Swami gives a name for that. Swami says the first, those five elements come actually as an expression of sattva. So if you look at it, it is like, if you really have to explain it, there is something which cannot be known in any way because it doesn't have any attributes. To know anything, like for instance, if you have to know any object, it should either have a form or you should be able to feel it like wind or something, or you should be able to smell it. So it was almost like this, there is this absolute which cannot be known or felt or in any way, suddenly decides, let me be known. So the first process is gain attributes.
Exactly. The first process of manifestation
is
to come within the attributes.
Right. So that's how Swami says that the five elements are actually an expression of sattva, which first it becomes sound, and then it becomes that which can be
Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa,
right. All of that. And here Swami is saying that the Lord is Shuddha Sattva, which means when you remove even the attribute. Later Swami says how the Sattvic itself is a combination of all of this put together and all that. And when you say Shuddha Sattva, I think it's very close to what the Vedic affirmation which says that Prajnanam Brahma.
Yes.
Just that knowledge, that knowing alone itself is Brahma. Because when you say Sattva, I think it relates to knowing. That which is, which decided to be known. So I think Sattva actually represents that knowing. And Swami is saying that Suddha Sattva is God. I think it's the same as Prajnanam Brahma.
Yeah. So here we are talking about the names and why they are so significant. But as we discussed earlier, even the forms of the Lord, like here Swami is talking about Vishnu and how it actually means all pervasive. But everything that Lord Vishnu had, including the conch, the chakra, the mace, the flower, all of them are symbolic. Like the conch is probably symbolic of the five elements, Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. And then of course the chakra is a wheel of time and how it controls all the 6 seasons with the 6 spokes. And then you have the Gada, power. So, and lotus is that purity, that urge for creation. These are different explanations given to the different forms of the Lord. And in sharp contrast with this, again going back to what scientists and science perceives, Richard Feynman, who is supposed to be a leading scientist in quantum mechanics and quantum science, so he says the theory that it's all arranged as a stage for God to watch man struggle for good and evil seems inadequate. Because they are looking at our sun and our solar system as a speck in the entire universe, and they are able to probe into other universes and other galaxies. So they suddenly realize, isn't our world too small, and aren't we talking too big of ourselves? But the fact that this world is what is enabling you to perceive your life on this earth is what is giving you the power and the ability to look beyond is, I think, forgotten in this statement.
I think so too. And I also feel that what we studied till now in today's discourse, so simply it just occurred to me that Swami said that initially he was all by himself. It was pure consciousness, absolutism. And he had this thought where he decided the manifestation happened. So that's when the gunas came. The mountains rose, the rivers started to fly, the trees, the flora, the fauna, the birds. And then he wanted somebody who was as intelligent enough to recognize this beauty and the power behind it. And he created us, he created humanity. So in the process, from absolutely no guna to creating an interplay of the 3 gunas or the 3 qualities, which fell into this interplay, and what came out of it is the entire creation and the drama that we live as the human experience. It all seems, as we could easily say, as Swami's Leela, And that's pretty much what he has taught us so far in terms of, there are so many layers of understanding it, but to simplify it as a student, I see it as that.
And, talking about giving that form and getting confused because of the form. I think the whole thing is that, when you say that Vishnu has 4
arms,
limbs, when you talk about attributelessness and then you talk about a form, it's almost like, the way I would like to think of it is, if somebody comes and asks you, can you describe Swami's perfume? Like, we've all enjoyed that fragrance, waft past us when Swami comes for darshan. We've all experienced it. Now, if I have to explain that fragrance to somebody who has never experienced it,
it's only through a simile through...
Yeah, probably I can think of 4 fragrances and say that, all of this put together. Or I can, describe it like, that's a fragrance when it comes, you remember this, or, it gives you this feeling of exhilaration. But all this can only be representative of that fragrance which we've experienced, but never can be complete. But I think over time, if this gets documented and says that this is what the fragrance, and everybody believes that this is the fragrance and starts trying to recreate the fragrance based on these references, I think that's precisely what we've done with the forms of Vishnu, Shiva, and what was representative has become something like a blocked and hard concretization of that particular entity.
And that's the danger of symbolism. Sometimes symbolism is perceived as the reality.
Right. And I think all said and done, we've spoken so much about it. Wonder where we are in that understanding itself.
That's
that's the beauty. We can speak of all the absoluteness, but end of the day, we're going to think of Swami and thank Swami for the opportunity. And and even as we thank, it's just that same form which was so beautiful. It comes to our mind, and I don't think we need to worry about that. And it's a wonder if not for this being Swami's discourse, I wonder if I would have read it.
That's right.
And I think that is where we all, owe all our gratitude to that devotion which Swami inspired in all of us. Because the ability to even look at these deeper things is because his words matter. And to love him, we have to look at his words. Yeah. And I think that's the idea behind this entire program. So dear listeners, thank you for being with us. And of course, thanks to Didi for joining us. On behalf of both of them, I offer this effort at Swami's lotus feet. Thank you for being with us.
Sai Ram.
Sai Ram.